At midnight, he was alone in his house as usual, sipping tea and reading a book, when he suddenly felt a chill in the air that didn't come from the window or the vent. A silence so heavy it pressed against his chest, and then a soft scraping noise from the hallway made him freeze. He paused, straining his ears as the soft scraping grew louder, slow steps that didn't belong to him, echoing lightly off the walls, making his heart race and the hairs on his neck stand on end. He set the book down and slowly rose, every instinct screaming to run, but curiosity chained him in place, inching toward the hallway where the darkness seemed alive and watching, stretching its fingers along the walls. Then, as he stepped closer, the lights flickered, and for a heartbeat, he thought he saw a silhouette standing at the far end of the hallway. Tall, thin, featureless, motionless, yet radiating an unseen presence. He blinked, and it was gone, leaving only the echo of his own breathing, uneven, harsh, as if the house itself had exhaled around him. Every creak of the floorboards, every whisper of air through the vent, felt deliberate, orchestrated, as though the house had a mind and was testing him, learning him. He reached the staircase, hesitated, and peered down into the darkness below. The faint outline of the steps barely visible, and then he felt it, a subtle indentation in the carpet, like someone had just stood there, but he was alone. Fear clawed at his mind, but he couldn't turn back. He had to see, to know what lurked in the shadows that felt almost alive. He slowly descended the stairs, each step creaking beneath his weight, and the darkness seemed to deepen with every inch he moved, swallowing the familiar shapes of his house. At the bottom, the living room looked the same, but something felt off. The furniture seemed slightly shifted, the carpet slightly wrinkled, as if an invisible presence had rearranged everything in silence. He took a tentative step toward the hallway, heart pounding, and heard it again. A scraping sound, softer this time, almost deliberate, echoing from the end of the corridor. The hairs on his arms rose, and he realized the air had grown colder, heavier, wrapping around him like invisible hands that tugged him forward. Dark hallway corner, tall humanoid shadow with pointed shoulders, back-facing viewer, ultra-realistic 4K, subtle psychological horror, cinematic lighting. He froze, willing his body not to move, and the shadow didn't shift, didn't blink. It simply existed, a presence that felt alive and aware of him. Slowly, almost involuntarily, he stepped forward, and the shadow vanished in an instant, leaving a faint ripple across the floor, as though the air itself had been disturbed. He felt drawn to the room at the end of the hall, the door slightly ajar, and inside the faintest glow illuminated shapes that didn't belong. A rocking chair moving ever so slightly, a curtain swaying though the window was closed. His own reflection caught in the glass of a picture frame seemed warped, elongated, shadows moving independently behind him, teasing, taunting, and he realized he was not alone, not truly. Every sound, the ticking of the clock, the hum of the refrigerator, even his breathing, suddenly felt amplified, magnified. A soundtrack to the unseen presence that watched his every move. He stepped into the room, every instinct screaming to turn back, yet curiosity rooted him in place, and the air was colder than any winter night he had felt, thick and pressing against his skin. The rocking chair moved again, slower this time, as if testing him, each creak a whispered warning, and the curtain shifted though no breeze touched it, making him flinch instinctively. He scanned the corners, the shelves, the furniture, but saw nothing, yet a feeling of being watched made his skin crawl, the sense of another presence in the room undeniable. Then he noticed a shadow detach itself from the far wall, long and thin, moving slowly toward him, its form featureless, yet its intent unmistakable, creeping closer with each heartbeat. He stumbled backward, his foot hitting the edge of a rug, but the shadow paused, hovering like it had anticipated his movement, and a chill ran through his body that made him tremble uncontrollably. The lamp flickered violently, casting dancing shadows across the walls, and he saw them. The shadows moving independently, forming shapes he could not comprehend, whispering threats he could not hear. Heart pounding, he tried to speak, to call out, but his voice caught in his throat, and he realized he was not alone. Something or someone was mimicking his movements, always one step behind. Every corner seemed to pulse with life. The furniture, the floorboards, the air itself vibrating as though it had a consciousness, and a low whisper grazed his ear, cold and deliberate. He backed toward the doorway, only to find the exit blocked by darkness itself, a wall of black shadow pressing against him, and for the first time he felt true panic gripping his mind. The shadows began to writhe, stretching across the floor like living tendrils, and he realized that he could see them move, but could not interact, could not touch, trapped in a room that had become a predator. As he pressed himself against the far wall, trying to make himself invisible, the temperature dropped further, and the faintest whisper of movement brushed past his shoulder, almost imperceptible, yet undeniably real. He stumbled into the next room, his breath ragged, eyes wide, and the shadows seemed to follow, stretching along the walls and floor, bending unnaturally as if alive, moving faster with each heartbeat. The room was empty, but the temperature dropped sharply, frost forming on the edges of the window pane, and the furniture creaked as if shifting on its own, testing his fear. He froze as he heard it. A soft, deliberate whisper coming from the far corner, indistinct words but heavy with menace, and he felt the darkness pulse like a heartbeat, synchronized with his own. The walls themselves seemed to breathe, expanding and contracting subtly, elongating the shadows, twisting familiar shapes into grotesque forms, testing his sanity. He backed toward the center of the room only to find the doorway behind him had disappeared, replaced by an endless black void, and panic gripped him as he realized he was trapped. The shadows advanced slowly, tendrils creeping along the floor, wrapping around his legs, unseen hands brushing against him, and he could feel the presence of something intelligent, aware, hunting. He tried to call out, his voice caught, swallowed by the oppressive silence, and the shadows responded with movement, stretching higher, coiling closer, forming shapes that resembled him, mocking his fear. Every instinct screamed to escape, but there was no exit, only the shadows, pulsating, writhing, alive with an intelligence that made him shiver uncontrollably. He stumbled backward, crashing into a table, knocking over a lamp, and the sudden light flickered, revealing a featureless figure in the center of the room, standing completely still, watching him. The figure didn't move, didn't blink, but the air felt thick with intent, and he realized it had been waiting for him, orchestrating every creak, every shadow, every whisper since he entered the house. Heart hammering, he tried to run, but the shadows seemed to grip the floor beneath his feet, slowing him down, and the whispering grew louder, as though the walls themselves were speaking directly into his mind. He realized that this house wasn't just haunted. It was alive, sentient, feeding on fear, and he had become its newest obsession, trapped in a nightmare that had been waiting for him long before he arrived. He turned to flee, heart hammering violently, but the shadows seemed to surge forward with every step he took, curling along the floor like living tendrils, reaching for him, pulling him back toward the center of the room. His hand scrambled for the doorway, the handle icy to touch, as if resisting him, and the darkness thickened around him, pressing from all sides, whispering incoherent words that gnawed at his mind. He stumbled into the hall, footsteps echoing unnaturally loud, and glanced over his shoulder to see the shadow figure gliding silently behind him, faceless, moving impossibly fast, stretching its form to fill the corridor. The air grew colder with every step, each breath visible, swirling in front of him like smoke, and the shadows multiplied, crawling from walls, floor, and ceiling, writhing toward him from every direction. He tried to sprint, but the floor beneath him seemed to pull him back, subtle yet undeniable, as if the house itself had extended hands to hold him, and a low, hollow whisper reverberated through the corridor. Turning a corner, he saw the staircase at the end. Faint light spilling from the upper floor, and hope surged, but the shadows blocked the way, stretching impossibly wide, forming grotesque shapes that mimicked his fear. He leapt over a shadow tendril curling across the floor, stumbled, almost fell, but regained balance and scrambled up the first step, the shadows lapping at his heels like a predator chasing prey. Reaching the landing, he pressed against the wall, trying to catch his breath, but realized the upper floor stretched unnaturally. Hallways longer, doors shifting in position, the house bending reality around him. The shadow figure emerged at the top of the stairs, featureless, immense, yet moving with impossible grace, and every instinct screamed that escape was no longer an option. Heart hammering, he turned to look for another exit, but the corridor behind him had disappeared, replaced by impenetrable darkness, and he realized the house had him cornered, the nightmare inescapable. Every breath, every heartbeat, every nerve screamed danger, and he felt the presence of something ancient, sentient, feeding on his fear, studying him, learning him, waiting for the perfect moment. He froze at the center of the hallway as the shadow figure lunged forward, impossibly fast, stretching across the walls and floor, its faceless form now terrifyingly close, and his heart pounded like a drum in a silent hall. He stumbled backward, colliding with a chair that toppled over with a loud crash, and the sound seemed to awaken the shadows even more, multiplying, swirling around him, closing every possible exit. Every instinct screamed to run, but the shadows gripped the floor, wrapping around his ankles, slowing him down, and he could feel their cold pressure, intelligent, deliberate, as if aware of every thought in his mind. He saw a faint light streaming through a slightly open window at the far end of the hallway, a glimmer of hope, and surged toward it, pushing against the oppressive darkness with all his strength. The shadow figure surged forward, massive and featureless, every step impossible, every motion unnatural, and he felt the air press against him, thick and heavy, suffocating, as though the house itself wanted him gone. He leapt toward the window, grasping the sill, feeling the cold wood under his hands, and swung his body out, adrenaline fueling every motion as the shadows surged up the walls behind him. Landing outside in the cold night air, he scrambled to his feet, the shadows halting at the window frame, unable to follow, as if restrained by some invisible barrier, and he gasped, chest heaving, terrified but alive. He looked back at the house, its windows dark and silent once again, but a faint ripple across the doorway suggested the shadow was still watching, still waiting, and a chill ran down his spine. Breathless, he ran down the street, every step fueled by fear and relief, yet the whispers of the shadows lingered in his mind, echoing, twisting reality, leaving him wondering if he had truly escaped. As he disappeared into the darkness, the house remained, silent, patient, a predator waiting for the next intruder, the next victim, the shadows stretching and writhing inside, unseen yet eternal. He ran down the dark street, heart hammering, sweat soaking his shirt, every instinct screaming relief. Yet the whispers of the house lingered in his mind, soft but unmistakable. He slowed near a corner, trying to catch his breath, and the silence pressed down heavier than the shadows, leaving a ringing in his ears, the memory of every movement inside the house imprinted in his mind. Then he felt it, an impossible chill along his spine, like fingers brushing through the air, and instinctively he turned, but nothing was there, only the quiet night. He thought he was safe, but a whisper tickled his ear, low, deliberate, the same unintelligible tone from the house, and he realized the terror had followed him, not in body but in mind. Every street lamp flickered, casting distorted shadows that seemed to mimic the shapes he had seen inside, and a cold wind carried a faint scraping sound that made him flinch instinctively. He reached a familiar corner, the neighborhood safe in daylight, but tonight it was a distorted mirror of his own fear. The familiar shapes warped, stretching and twisting in ways impossible yet undeniably real. His own shadow stretched longer than natural, moving slightly on its own, teasing him, reminding him that some part of the darkness had followed and that the house was not done with him. He broke into a run again, faster this time, adrenaline pushing him forward, but the whispers intensified, twisting into incoherent words that filled his mind with doubt and fear. Finally, he reached his car, threw open the door, and sat inside, hands shaking on the wheel, trying to convince himself he was safe. But the reflection in the rearview mirror told him otherwise. Outside, the street was silent again, but a ripple in the darkness at the edge of his vision suggested the house was still watching, still patient, still hungry, and he realized he had escaped only for now. He drove away slowly, but every shadow on the road, every flicker of light, every whisper in the wind reminded him, some nightmares never end, and the house waits for its next visitor. Days passed, Yet the memory of the house and its shadows clung to him like a second skin, every quiet room whispering its name, every shadow hinting at something waiting just out of sight. He tried to sleep, but even in dreams the faceless figure returned, standing in corners, bending reality, stretching the shadows across familiar rooms, testing him while he was vulnerable. Even outside, the world seemed altered. Every alleyway, every park, every quiet street carried the same weight. A reminder that the house had left a piece of itself behind, a fragment of terror that could not be shaken. Sometimes, in the corner of his eye, he would see a flicker, a shadow moving impossibly fast, gone before he could look directly, yet the dread remained, growing, relentless. And then one night, a familiar chill brushed his neck, soft but deliberate, and he heard a faint whisper, "You can never leave completely," and the air around him pulsed with intent. He shivered, realizing that the house, the shadows, the unseen presence, none of it had ever truly left. And somewhere, far away, new footsteps approached a familiar street, heading toward a house that waited silently, eternally patient. The nightmare was not over. It had only shifted, waiting for the next victim, and for him, the fear would linger forever, a reminder that some shadows never fade. And somewhere in the darkness, the house smiled silently, patient, knowing its next visitor was already on their way.